Era when the winds of change were sweeping across Africa, a powerful dream of unity took shape on the Horn of Africa. It was a vision born from a shared language, a common faith, and a deep-seated desire to erase the artificial lines drawn by colonial powers. On June 26, 1960, after nearly 70 years of British administration, the Protectorate of Somaliland gained its independence, becoming the sovereign state of Somaliland. Just 5 days later, on July 1, 1960, the Trust Territory of Somalia, which had been under Italian administration, also became independent. On that very same day, in an act of extraordinary speed, the two territories voluntarily merged to form the Somali Republic. Jubilant crowds poured into the streets. For a fleeting moment, the Somali Republic stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of pan-nationalist ideals in a continent struggling to define its post-colonial future. The world watched, seeing a potential model for how a people divided by empire could come together as one. This was the culmination of a dream fueled by a shared language, a nomadic way of life, and an overwhelming desire to live under a single flag. But beneath the surface of this euphoric celebration, the story of unity concealed deep and dangerous fault lines. The initial excitement of 1960 would give way to political turmoil, a brutal civil war, and ultimately, a complete state collapse just 30 years later. The very speed of the merger, driven by nationalist passion, meant that critical questions about how to integrate two vastly different societies were never fully addressed. Today, the legacy of that union is fiercely debated and contested. The North has governed itself as the self-declared Republic of Somaliland since 1991, achieving relative peace and stability. The South, meanwhile, has faced decades of conflict and instability while working to rebuild a central government. To understand the complex politics of today, we must look back at the colonial forces that first brought them together and the profound institutional differences that ultimately tore them apart. Building a nation, it turned out, required more than just a shared dream. The decision to unite grew from years of rising national pride, crystallized in the powerful symbolism of the new national flag. Its light blue background, inspired by the flag of the United Nations, represented the sky and the Indian Ocean, but it was the central white star of unity that held the most potent meaning. This was the emblem of Greater Somalia, a powerful nationalist aspiration to unite all Somali-inhabited lands under one government. Each of its 5 points represented a distinct territory. 2 for the territories that had just united, the former British Somaliland and Italian Somaliland. The other 3 represented aspirations for future unification with French Somaliland, now Djibouti, the Ogaden region in Ethiopia, and the Northern Frontier District in Kenya. This flag was a declaration of a future mission. However, the emotional power of this vision papered over the profound differences forged by 70 years of separate colonial administration. The British and the Italians had not just governed differently, they had cultivated entirely separate paths of development. British involvement in the North, beginning in the late 1880s, was strategic and minimalist. Its primary interest was securing livestock and supplies for its key port of Aden. Britain established a protectorate through a series of agreements with the powerful northern Somali clans, adopting a policy of indirect rule. This meant that for most people, life continued to be governed by Zir, the indigenous Somali customary law. Zir is a sophisticated legal system based on precedent, collective responsibility, and mediation by councils of elders. It was flexible, decentralized, and deeply embedded in the pastoral culture. The British introduced their own system of common law for official matters, creating a dual legal structure. With little investment in infrastructure, a small English-speaking elite emerged, educated in British schools and familiar with parliamentary democracy. They came to value decentralized governance, which they saw as compatible with their own traditions. In stark contrast, Italy's colonial project in the south was one of direct rule, settlement, and economic exploitation. They established a highly centralized state and invested heavily in infrastructure, plantations, and administrative buildings to serve the colony and a growing population of Italian settlers. The legal system imposed here was Italian civil law, a codified top-down system where laws are written into a collection. When Italy was granted a UN trusteeship over the territory from 1950 to 1960, it launched a decade of intensive state building. This created a complete Italian-style government in waiting, a centralized bureaucracy, a national police force, and a political class accustomed to a strong unitary state. So, on July 1, 1960, two states merged, but their institutions were worlds apart. One was decentralized, accustomed to common law and indirect rule. The other was highly centralized, built on civil law and direct administration. How do you merge a police force trained by Italians with one trained by the British? How do you reconcile two different legal codes overnight? What is the official language of government, English or Italian? Leaders from the North expected a partnership of equals, a federal-style system that preserved local autonomy. Many in the South, which was more populous and had the capital, assumed the North would simply be absorbed into their pre-existing structure. These weren't just political disagreements, they were fundamental clashes of culture, law, and expectation, planting the seeds of grievance and a growing sense of regional unfairness that would soon begin to sprout. On July 1, 1960, a wave of pan-Somali optimism crested. After years of separate colonial paths, the legislative assemblies of the British Protectorate and the Italian Trust Territory both passed an act of union. The dream of a Greater Somalia, uniting all Somali people under one flag, seemed within reach. The new nation was born, with its capital established in the South's administrative hub, Mogadishu. The international community quickly recognized the Somali Republic. A power-sharing arrangement was struck at the top. Aden Abdulle Osman Daar, a southerner from the Hawiye clan, became the nation's first president. Abdirashid Ali Shermarke, a northerner from the Majirteen clan, was appointed prime minister. It was a symbolic gesture of unity, a promise of a balanced partnership. This spirit of coalition was meant to be the bedrock of the new state. The two separate legislative bodies were combined to form a single national assembly, a visible symbol of the two territories becoming one. Yet, from the very beginning, the union was imbalanced. The structure of the new central government was modeled almost entirely on the institutions left behind by the Italians in the South. The political gravity of the new republic immediately tilted southward. This was not by accident, but a result of history. The South had a larger population and more established political party networks, like the powerful Somali Youth League. Furthermore, its decade as a UN trust territory under Italian administration had brought significant international investment in infrastructure and state building that the Northern Protectorate simply hadn't received. As the capital, Mogadishu naturally became the undisputed center of commerce, media, and international diplomacy, attracting the lion's share of resources and opportunities. For officials arriving from the north, the transition was jarring. They were accustomed to the British colonial model of administration and now had to navigate a centralized, unfamiliar southern bureaucracy. This culture clash was compounded by a language barrier that went far beyond casual conversation. The two territories had inherited fundamentally different legal frameworks. The north operated under British common law, built on precedent and judicial interpretation. The south used the European civil law system, based on comprehensive, codified statutes. These weren't mere technicalities. The differences profoundly shaped everything from property rights and business contracts to criminal procedure and the very definition of justice. Harmonizing them proved to be a monumental and often contentious task. The merger of the civil services was another major source of friction. Northern professionals, many trained in the UK, found their qualifications and seniority were often not recognized or were valued less than their southern counterparts. Disputes over pay scales, rank and pension calculations became common, breeding deep resentment. The language of administration was a constant obstacle. English was the language of government in the north, Italian, the language of the south. In the new capital, communication faltered. Many English-speaking northerners felt like outsiders in their own capital, where Italian dominated the elite social and political circles, effectively locking them out of the informal networks where real power was brokered. Power and influence became visibly concentrated. Key government ministries, foreign embassies, and the headquarters of the National Army and Police were all firmly rooted in Mogadishu. To many in the north, it appeared that the flow of development aid, foreign investment, and government spending was overwhelmingly directed toward the south. The first major political test of the Union came in June 1961 with a referendum on a new unified constitution. The result was a stark warning. While it passed comfortably in the south, it was overwhelmingly rejected by voters in the north, who felt it cemented their subordinate status. Discontent boiled over. In December 1961, a group of junior British-trained Northern officers attempted a coup to dissolve the Union. Though it failed within hours, the event exposed the profound depth of the grievances. The dream of a partnership was fading. For a growing number of Northerners, the Union felt less like a merger of equals and more like a hostile takeover by the South. The 1960s saw a fragile democracy limp forward, marred by corruption and clan politics. This instability created a vacuum. Following the assassination of President Shermarke in October 1969, the military, led by Major General Mohammed Siad Barre, seized power in a bloodless coup. Barre suspended the constitution, dissolved parliament, and declared a new path for Somalia: scientific socialism. Initially, his regime brought a sense of purpose, launching popular literacy campaigns and public works projects. Backed by the Soviet Union, Barre reignited the pan-Somali dream by invading Ethiopia's Ogaden region in 1977. But when the Soviets switched allegiance to Ethiopia, the war ended in a humiliating defeat for Somalia in 1978. The defeat shattered the nation's morale and economy. Barre's regime, now propped up by the United States in a Cold War realignment, grew increasingly paranoid and authoritarian. Power, already centralized in Mogadishu, now concentrated in the hands of Siad Barre and his inner circle. He abandoned his anti-clan rhetoric, favoring his own Marahan clan and its allies in a system of patronage that alienated much of the country. Northern grievances, which had simmered for 2 decades, now intensified under a regime they saw as both illegitimate and oppressive. Dissent was ruthlessly crushed by a vast state security apparatus. In response, the Somali National Movement, or SNM, an opposition group supported largely by the Northern Isaac clan, launched an armed insurgency. The regime's response was genocidal. In 1988, it unleashed its air force on the North's 2 largest cities, Hargeisa and Burao, reducing them to rubble and killing tens of thousands of civilians. This was the final brutal severance of the Union's bond. By 1991, armed rebellions across the country converged on the capital. Siad Barre fled, and the entire state structure collapsed. In the south, a vicious civil war erupted between rival clan-based factions, plunging the region into anarchy and famine. But amid the chaos, a different story unfolded in the north. The SNM, having secured the territory, convened a grand conference of clan elders in Burao. There, they made a historic decision to withdraw from the Union and restore the independent state of Somaliland. Over the next 3 decades, Somaliland followed a unique path. Through a series of indigenous reconciliation conferences, it disarmed militias and built a stable political system from the ground up. It has since held multiple democratic elections, established its own government, currency, and army, and maintained a remarkable degree of peace. Despite this achievement in self-governance, it still lacks formal international recognition as a sovereign state. The rest of Somalia, meanwhile, has continued on a long and difficult, internationally supported path to rebuild a central state, battling insurgency, and navigating the complexities of a federal system. The legacy of the 1960 Union is a powerful lesson. A shared culture, language, and religion are potent forces for unity, but they cannot sustain a state on their own. True, lasting partnership requires something more. It requires inclusive institutions, mutual respect, and a political structure that is seen by all its people as just. Without a fair distribution of power and opportunity, even a union of brothers is bound to fail.